Sadanand Dhume, and I am with the American Enterprise Institute, and I also write a column on South Asia for the Wall Street Journal. Wonderful presentations all, and I'm going to take this opportunity to ask two questions, but I'll keep them both brief. The first is for Ambassador Maleeha Lodhi, and when you were speaking about Pakistani politics and patronage networks and so on, and how this has a terrible effect on governance, I couldn't help but think that you could be speaking about many countries. You could be speaking about India, you could be speaking about Bangladesh, you could be speaking arguably about Thailand. While I sympathize with the problem, I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you can be democratic, truly democratic, and step away from the kinds of politicians democracy tends to throw out. And this is to the point of civil society, and I agree with you that there's this that there are elements of Pakistani civil society that are pushing back against this tide of Islamism or jihadism, or call it what you like, and many of them are among the bravest people on the subcontinent today. But at the same time, what one sees, for example, after the murder of Governor Salman Taseer, you see 500 people show up for his funeral, and you have 30,000 people on the streets chanting in favor of his assassin, Qadri. And so the question that some of us raise, even though we admire these people in civil society, is to what extent do they matter? And how could we make them matter more?
But I think the missing element in Pakistan is weak political institutions. I think some of the instances, India is the case in point. You have stronger institutions in India, so that even if the system is being operated with strong patronage features, there are checks on that system that kick in. Here, except for the fact that now we see changes in Pakistani society, including the role of the broadcast media, which is holding governments to account much more than ever before. I think we are entering a period where there will be greater checks on the exercise of executive power. Now, when you say that, how do we change some of this? One of the points that I'm concerned with is low voter turnout in Pakistan. I think it says something about the health of a democracy if the majority of people don't show up to vote, especially in a country which has had high voter turnout records in the past. So there is something that representative politics or representative politicians are not, in a way, firing up or inspiring sort of people or capturing the imagination of the people. And I think the key really is, I make two arguments. One, the problems of governance in Pakistan are so complex that politics as usual will produce a democracy deficit. People will begin to want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, whereas that is not the case. So parties need to adapt to changes around them, and that's the argument I make, that existing parties need, through their ticketing policies, to bring in the kind of middle class and other sources of expertise that will help them govern. Because governance cannot simply be about operating a spoil system, which is what it amounts to. I'll give you an example, for example. There is something called the Benazir Income Support Program right now in Pakistan. In fact, there's a lot of US money and World Bank money that's gone into it. It's pure and simple patronage. It is only given to those who are supporters of the ruling party. Now, I'm not here to either, critique anybody or to not critique, but it's a very good example of, if you have funds available, use it for something more durable. This is a straight cash transfer, creates no income. It's basically a handout. So you have all these resources. It's a stunning example, actually, of how also external assistance actually doesn't really help the broad population of a country, but becomes an instrument in the hands of an elite that uses it for patronage. So I think the same resources, if they were to be utilized by a political party that felt it was more responsive to citizens in general, rather than to its band of supporters, you would, one, produce better governance. Two, you would not produce disappointment with democracy, which inevitably then follows. Again, people are unable to distinguish between, well, this is not how it's supposed to function. People then tend to rush to judgment and say, well, this is not what we want. So I think my purpose here is to improve governance by suggesting reforms that in a way, reflect the changes that have been occurring in Pakistani society. The size of the middle class, it is a contested notion. But today it's estimated by economists, and I'll go by their judgment, by leading economists of the country, that the size of the middle class, urban middle class, is about 30 million. Now that doesn't mean it's a cohesive entity and they all think the same way and they all represent the kind of thing that Ziad is talking about, although that opinion is to be found within this middle class too. But these are increasingly disenfranchised. Now you could say, well, maybe they're doing it themselves, perhaps. They themselves are not participating in politics, but then what is it about political parties that is not, in a way, inviting these people? So I think the sort of, it's a very long answer that I gave to a very short question, but the idea really is that we have to move away from a patronage-oriented polity towards one that also is concerned with policy and that is able to respond to the needs of people as citizens and not just people as bands of supporters or followers of clans or personalized networks. Now, of course, these are features you find in many countries, Latin America, this is the developing country syndrome. Its features are found in developed countries too. But the entire system doesn't pivot around it. And that's the point I'm making. That if the entire system pivots around it, then you inevitably produce disappointment. And that's not an outcome I would like to see. I'd like the political parties to really be 21st century political parties, not just extensions of dynasties and clans who really, also the principle of dynastic succession in the 21st century is a bit off in a country which has such a sophisticated population, whose diaspora you know very well. I mean, these are people who are educated in Pakistan. So here is a sophisticated country with so much to offer, and yet its politics is not capturing that, and I do it very much to see how best we can get its politics to capture that, and therefore create the means to govern itself better.
It isn't. All I'm saying is that there are elements within it that are offering, I think, a different narrative. So that's, I'm sure many of you didn't lose that point in the course of my remarks. But to your broader point, yeah, that is extremely disturbing, but I don't, at some level, I'm not surprised. I mean, we have lived with a particular narrative. Pakistan has had a particular narrative for 64 years, which has precisely enabled, I mean, it's the logical outcome of that. I quoted to you the Munir report in 1954. At that time, the country, there were people in the country who were fearing about this move in terms of saying that so-and-so is not a Muslim, so-and-so is an apostate, and we should dispense with them. That strain has only become more virulent with time. So when we see a reaction like that, yes, I mean, it's 64 years of that type of a narrative that leads us to a point like that. But having said that, to your point about to what extent do the people who are opposing that type of thing matter, I don't agree with that question per se, because what does it mean to say do they matter or not? They are part of that civil society, and it's that push and pull that I'm just trying to observe and convey to you. And that push and pull is ongoing, and it's something for us to observe. And, I mean, if we look at sort of what's happening in the Middle East today, I don't think anyone would have thought 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or a year ago, or 4 months ago that some of these groups mattered. But, they, through their own internal sort of process, in Egypt, for example, rose up and now are offering a different vision for their state. So I'm not so sure that I want to say who matters and who not. I think I just want to leave it at that. There's a push and pull in Pakistani civil society, in any civil society, and it's worth for us to just observe that and think about the direction the country is heading in. And so then how do we make them matter more? Well, again, I think I come back to that point that this is something which, as the book emphasizes, is a debate within Pakistan. To the extent that others can help, of course, there are all the fundamentals of government, like governance, education, security. If those blocks were built, then it allows, I guess, the progressive forces to say, look, we don't need to resort to Islam as an antidote. We have the answers. Our system is working well. You can sort of make those arguments, but at the most basic level, this is a debate within a society. It is an internal debate, and though it's shaped by external circumstances, it's not a question of who matters less or more. It's just a question of the debate. That's it.